Molly, in case you missed the first one, I did a nav thing for people, which was just me chatting about how to navigate and things like that. If you missed that, I think that's on YouTube or something like that on Adventure Queen's YouTube. So yeah, go and have a look at that. So today I was going to talk about mountain leader and like mountain training and things associated with that, and what the training and the assessment involves, and how you know like when you're ready and that sort of thing. So I'm probably going to screen share if the host is disabled screen sharing. Nadia, help.
Sorry. 1 second. Definitely not intentional.
That's okay.
All right, there you go, buddy. Should be able to do it now.
Thank you. Beautiful. Oh, we do love this. You know when you've like got the hang of Zoom and you think, oh, I've got it, and then you're like, maybe I haven't. So this is kind of like the first thing to think about is the like sort of order of the award. You can start at lowland leader, hill and moorland leader, or mountain leader, and it doesn't matter which one you start at, any of them are fine. But you do have to have mountain leader to go on to winter mountain leader or international mountain leader, or also mountain and climbing instructor, which is like, higher up, if that makes sense. So yeah, and in terms of like lowland leader and hill and moorland leader, you have to do, if you want to do expeditions, so like camping and stuff with groups, then it's a good idea to do the expedition skills module as well. It's worth saying that I haven't done lowland leader or hill and moorland leader. I've just gone straight into mountain leader and gone forwards from there, because I work in mountainous areas most of the time. So I don't know a great deal about lowland leader and hill and moorland leader. I just know what I've researched in comparison to other things, if that makes sense. So mostly I'm going to chat about the ML, but I will kind of come back to the other two if people, if that makes sense. So this is cool. This is like the differences between them, if that makes sense. So and these 3 awards are like the start off ones, if that makes sense, and they are at different levels for different people. So if you lived in, say, Dartmoor, mountain leader wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for the environment that you'd be taking groups out in, or that you'd be going out in, essentially. Hill and moorland leader might be more suited, and if you live in like the Cotswolds or somewhere like that, then lowland leader might be more suited. So it's just kind of putting things into categories for different people and for what you want, essentially. So it's worth thinking about what you want and where you want to be. You can do, like, say, lowland leader and then go on to mountain leader if you decide to work or whatever in a different area. It's also worth saying that you don't need these qualifications to take people out on the hills or whatever. But I'd say if you're doing it for money, then it's a good idea to get a qualification behind you, because it kind of almost means that you're more insurable, if that makes sense. And I'll get onto that later about insurance and how that all works. But yeah, it's a good idea to have a qualification if you're planning to do it out of like taking groups out and getting money out of it. Lowland leader is non-hazardous terrain, meaning there's no crags or things that you can fall over other than your own feet and grass. So it's no more than 3 kilometers away from access. Access means a road or a lay-by. So generally in lowland leader, you'll probably all have a phone signal, and you will most likely be close enough to a road that you could, you know, get help within a certain amount of time, like, you know, 3K, you could probably run that in like, you know, half an hour or whatever if you were, you know, on undulating terrain. So it's only on paths, tracks, and bridleways. You're not supposed to go off track. So, you know, there's a compass element in it, but the like compass element isn't take a bearing to this point. It's like, I use the compass to go the right way, essentially. Summer conditions only. It's worth mentioning that all three of these are summer conditions only. Summer conditions only doesn't mean that it's only in like June, July, August, or whatever. It means that there isn't snow and ice on the ground. So if it's June and there's snow and ice on the ground still, you are then out of remit on all three of these, with groups, if that makes sense. So, but you can check weather forecasts, and there's ground forecasts and stuff like that are on the internet that you should be able to know and plan your day accordingly to what's happening, essentially. So before you do the training for Lowland Leader, you need 10 walks on D-Log. I don't know if people know what D-Log is, but essentially mountain training is like the governing body of like mountaineering and climbing. And they have a website like under the name of mountain training. And then D-Log is your digital logbook. So you sign up with them and you have to pay a yearly subscription. I can't remember how much it is. It's like 30 something quid for me. As like an adult, if that makes sense. It's like young person ones and concession ones, I think, as well. And they'll be slightly different. So yeah, you pay a certain fee every year, and you log your days on this D-Log digital logbook, and essentially it comes up with like where you went, how many hours you were out for, what were the weather conditions like, were you leading or walking with peers or whatever. So yeah, you have to do 10 days logging on that, which is on the internet, essentially on this D-Log thing that you sign into. And that is to prove to assessors and training providers when you go to your courses, so that they can look at that and be like, all right, this person's done this, this, and this, so they know where you're at, essentially. So yeah, and then when you come to do the training, it's 2 days, so 2 full days of training in like leading groups and stuff, and Lowland Leader. You need 20 walks on D-Log before you do your assessment, so that's those 10 walks do count towards that, so then that's an additional 10 walks, and then your assessment is also 2 days of whatever. So yeah, lovely. Hill and Moorland Leader is similar, but it allows you to have a bit more freedom in terms of where you can go. So it's open land, non-mountainous. Yeah, it's quite vague about that, to be honest, on mountain training website, what counts as mountainous and what doesn't, but you know, just kind of use your head, I guess. Areas need to be enclosed by geographical or man-made boundaries. So that would be like you go for a walk and you know that there's a wall 4 miles to the right of you or whatever, 4 miles north, and then there's a road, yeah, etc. So if you go completely wrong, you know that you can just walk in a northerly direction for however many miles and you'll get to a road or something like that. Maximum a few hours away from access. That would be roads, villages, etc. Laybys as well. So that would be like a few hours. Again, what's a few? I'm probably going to say 2 or 3 hours away from a road at most. Steep, rocky, mountainous terrain is excluded, and that also includes even accidental walking into that area. So in terms of if you have this award, you need to be mindful of the routes that you're going to do and take that into account when you're doing planning for your day. Like if there's a chance you could end up in that terrain, you need to like be aware of how to avoid it, if that makes sense, and make sure you've got those catch features ready for, oh, I shouldn't have seen this here, I'm heading into a steep rocky place or whatever. You need 20 hill days before training on your D-log. Training is 3 days, and then you need 40 days before your assessment on D-log. So again, that's an additional 20 days to the 20 days you already have. Assessment is 3 days. That should say exped. You can do an exped module in addition to this, which we've already talked about, and again, it's summer conditions only. So those are that rambling. However, steep ground is covered as a topic, and we did, like, most of the time on your training and your assessment, you'll do 1 full day on what's called steep ground. So I'll get to what that looks like in a minute. But yeah, that's worth bearing in mind. It can be very remote, so out of phone signal or days away from roads. So days away from roads doesn't necessarily apply to Wales or to the Lake District, but it definitely does apply to Scotland. So this means that you can take groups out in Scotland, and you can, walk into a bivvy and then walk along to another campsite or a bivvy or whatever, and then, get to a few places away from roads or whatever. So yeah, but in doing so, you need to have those emergency procedures in the back of your brain as to how you're going to sort things out if something goes wrong. It can be off paths and in open access land. So, taking them from places to other places, essentially. You need 20 QMDs in your D-log before training. QMDs is called Quality Mountain Days. And to be a quality mountain day, it has to have a few things. So it has to have, I think it's 4 of 8 things or something like that. You can read it on the mountain training website, but essentially it's it has to be at least 6 hours long. It has to have covered a mountain or a peak. You have to have been above 600 meters for it to count as a mountain day. And it talks about possibly entering adverse weather conditions and being off paths and stuff like that. So that's what kind of counts towards a QMD. Some of those things, if that makes sense. And assessors will, so not so much with training. With training, it's kind of like QMDs can just be like mountain days on the path, but with assessment, they'll expect you to have quite a few days where you're off the path and you're just navigating using a compass and a map to get to points rather than using paths to get there. So yeah, training is 6 days. For me it was 5, but it was that was I don't know, quite young, so it's 5 years ago or something like that I did my training. So yeah, and 5 days was quite squidged, so they do it over 6 now, which is really good. And yeah, and then to do assessment, you need 40 QMDs in 3 different areas. So that can be Northern Ireland, Wales, North Wales, Scotland, and the Lake District. So any of those 4 essentially. You need 8 nights of camping, including 4 nights of wild camping, and you need first aid. That needs to be 16-hour outdoor first aid before your assessment. So you need to have that certificate before you do your assessment. Yeah, the assessment is 5 days, 2 of which exped. So it's kind of almost 3 days are exped. So it's it'll traditionally be a nav day, a steep ground day, and then exped day 1, overnight into exped day 2, and then another overnight into exped day 3, if that makes sense. And on day 3, it's literally just kind of pack up your tent and walk out. So yeah. Also on your training, you'll also do a camp out, probably a wild camp out, depending on conditions. If it's so on my training, it was snowing and hailing and stuff. So we walked to, they didn't tell us that we were doing this, but we walked to Mosedale Bothy, and then slept in the Bothy because it was just yeah, it was out of remit or whatever at that point, but the assessors not assessors, course providers decided that that was, you know, fine or whatever, because they'd seen us put up tents or whatever before. So yeah, that was on my training anyway. And then, yeah, that's your assessment. But with these 20 days, 40 days, 20 days, 40 days, 10 days, 20 days, they are like the minimum, if that makes sense. You want to, on your digital logbook, you want to look really good to assessors and course providers. Not so much before your training. Before your training doesn't really make too much difference. Like they'll always let you like on the training or whatever. But for the assessment, you want to look like you know what you're doing. So before my assessment, I had I think it was 65 QMDs, like 10 wild camps, and you know, that sort of thing. So I had quite a lot, and went above and beyond. And also that means you might get a slightly easier ride in terms of your assessment. So if like the assessor's asking you questions and stuff about things, and you've been to a lot of places and you know a lot of things, or you can discuss a lot of things, then you know they'll give you an easier ride possibly than somebody who's got the bare minimum and is kind of struggling to nav or whatever. That might give them harder legs to try and test them more. But if they can see that you're bomber and that you've had a lot of experience, then they'll give you a slightly easier ride, which I know isn't like great or whatever, but it's kind of true. Oh, I've just realised I also spelled hill wrong. Oh my god. Anyway. So I'll kind of like go through the four remaining slides that I have, and then I'll do the questions and chat stuff in a minute. So yeah, I'll kind of get out and then get to everything in a second. So it won't take too long, I don't think. So topics covered on Mountain Leader. So you don't do a home paper on training, but you have to do a home paper before assessment. The home paper generally has a series of questions on it, which you can research online, like on the internet first. But if you like do that, then you need to remember what the answers were, because sometimes they ask you the same questions again during assessment, like while you're walking. So yeah, just try and remember what the answers were if you do research them online or whatever. Group management, that's kind of assessed as you go along and taught as you go along in your training and your assessment. So like opportunities to teach you and stuff about things, they'll do them at various points or whatever. Essentially group management is just like bringing your group in close to talk to them when you're like trying to tell them information and stuff, and it's really windy and stuff. So bringing the group in close, understanding the hazards of that sort of thing, and you know what's the group doing right now. So if you turn your back for a minute and start walking and then turn around and suddenly little Jimmy's about to jump off a cliff or whatever, that's bad group management because you weren't then protecting the danger. So it's putting yourself in between the group and the danger most of the time, if that makes sense. So yeah, you will come across paths that go next to crags and things like that, or even like ponds and stuff like that, like bodies of water. So it's kind of like briefing the group appropriately and putting yourself in the place where you can be most useful. So yeah, they'll kind of cover it properly on training, and in terms of assessment, they'll just do it as you go along. And they'll also, in that, they look at how confident you are in addressing a group and stuff like that. So you have to do a talk as well on your, they might get you to do a little talk on training or whatever, but on assessment, they want you to do a talk on a topic in the mountains. So I think I did mine on Herdwick sheep, just because like I absolutely love them. They're so cute. They've got like little teddy bear smiles and stuff like that. They can survive 3 weeks in a snowdrift off the Roman fur, which is quite impressive. And they're really hardy sheep. So I did my one on that, but I also threw in other things. So I saw like flowers and things like that, and I was like, oh, this is this flower, and that's so and so bird, and you know, kind of as and when you see things, you're talking to the group, you're discussing where you're going, you're chatting to them as you walk along and things like that. You're not just kind of head down, plow straight for it. Yeah, so that's kind of comes under group management. Access in the environment is like kind of like the environment kind of is mostly about protecting things and following the country code and shutting gates and not eroding things that are not needing to be eroded, and trying to keep damage to a minimum where possible, taking litter home, that sort of thing, not pooing in the middle of the path, going behind something and digging a hole and that sort of thing. Access is like so knowing the difference between like where you're allowed to go and where you're not allowed to go. So we have what's called open access land on a lot of OS maps. That's kind of an orangey yellow colour for like all of it, if that makes sense. And that means that you can go anywhere on that land. But like in Scotland, they have the right to roam, which basically means you can go pretty much wherever you want. Like obviously don't upset farmers' fields or whatever, but like it's kind of quite a lot more freedom or whatever. So that's about knowing where you are and what the rules are in the area that you're in. And yeah, generally not upsetting the locals and stuff like that as well is like quite a, you know, if you're walking past like a little town or a little village or whatever, and you've got a group of teenagers that are swearing and shouting and stuff, it's kind of like that also kind of comes under group management, but it's like the environment and looking after other people who live there and keeping your group under control. XFed skills is like essentially like not buying a tent the day before your assessment or the day before your training and having never put it up before. So knowing the kit that you've got and knowing how it works, whatever. If you take 20 minutes to put a tent up, the assessors are going to start asking questions and be like, Matt, well, why do you not know how to do this and stuff like that. Also worth under XFed skills, it's like, you know, how would you manage a group who are cooking a meal on stoves and stuff like that? So it's like thinking about where you need to be to watch everybody, if that makes sense, and keep them safe. Cool. So moving on, weather. I won't say too much about weather. Weather is like some people find it super interesting, some people find it super boring. But they'll kind of be like, oh yeah, what does this cloud mean or whatever. So these clouds here, they're cumuliostratus. And they are kind of a sign that it's quite a stable conditions right now or whatever. You get other clouds which are like cirrus clouds, and they're like thin wispy clouds, they're quite high, and they'll mean that like rain and a storm is coming essentially. And I don't know if anyone's ever watched Up, but on Up they talk about a cumulonimbus, and that's when you get a very big black cloud and it goes black and then it gets a flat top. When it gets a flat top, it's going to drop all of its water, all of its thunder, everything's just going to pound down on you. And yeah, if you see one of them, then you need to think about heading down essentially, getting out of the way, because it's not going to stop for you. So yeah, it's things like that they want to know that you know essentially, and that will also come up in your home paper. They'll also ask you about clouds and things like that on your home paper. Also on weather is kind of getting reliable forecasts. So a lot of the time in the outdoors, they talk about getting maybe 2 or 3 forecasts even from different sources to kind of work out what is going to happen and have the ideas from all of them in your brain to almost plan the day out. So if, for example, you look at a forecast and all the forecasts say it's going to be a northeasterly wind today, you're going to be thinking, right, well, I want to have a sheltered lunch spot, so I'm going to find somewhere with a southwesterly aspect slope so that I can shelter my group while having lunch and things like that. So in terms of prior planning, the weather's super important, and they'll want to see that you understand that, if that makes sense. And also on the weather, they'll ask you to interpret Synoptic Charts. I don't know if people know what they are. They're like essentially the pressure charts that weather people look at to see what is happening with the weather. So they'll have like it'll have a picture of Britain and then a load of lines on the outside of it. The lines essentially mean how much wind there is. And then you get fronts, so you can have warm fronts, cold fronts, and occluded fronts. So warm fronts is when it doesn't necessarily mean it's warm weather. It means that it's coming in and it's going to be wet but warm. Cold front, it's going to come in and it's going to be wet and like but wet in a cold way. So it's going to have hail or snow, ice and stuff like that as a result. And then occluded fronts generally means that it's when a warm front catches up to a cold front, they come in together, and that kind of makes things twice as bad almost, if that makes sense. But you can read into these in your own time. This is a brilliant thing to do during lockdown when you're, waiting to get out into the hills, because obviously we can't necessarily get out into the hills unless you live there. And even then, people are trying to play it safe, aren't they, with not getting mountain rescue call outs and stuff. So these sort of things, the fauna and flowers and stuff, the weather, they're really good things to look into now, because they can, it's good to kind of get to know them now rather than when you're out on the hills going, I think I recognize that cloud. The flat iron top, what did you say about that? Oh no, that means it's thunder and lightning. So yeah, that's the weather. And kind of, with regards to looking at 3 different forecasts as well, just an example as to how important it is, not necessarily in a mountain leader term, but it could be applied to it. So a couple of years ago, there was an incident in a caving community where a group was in a cave and they'd only looked at one forecast, but if they'd looked at like 4 of the other forecasts, then they would have realized that that day there was thundery showers coming in that afternoon, and as a result they nearly had fatalities, because they very nearly had fatalities. I think the teacher was the last one out, and they had to be pulled out essentially by the instructor because the cave filled up with water so quickly. So I know it's not the same, but it's just an example of, if you only look at one forecast, you only get one piece of information. Whereas if you look at several, then it's helpful. Also, it's helpful to think about which ones are optimistic and which ones are pessimistic. So there's some forecasts that you're like, I'll look at this forecast, and you're like, sunny all day. Oh, that sounds lovely. And then you look at another one and it's like, it's going to rain at this time, this time, this time, and this time. And it's going to be really torrential at these times. And you're like, yeah, neither of those were necessarily right. It was somewhere in the middle. But think about how different they are. So one's optimistic and one was pessimistic, to be honest. That was my kind of gist there. Background knowledge, essentially that's like them looking at your D-log and looking at your QMDs and seeing what you've done. And they'll also ask you questions about the things on your D-log or about where you are and stuff like that. So they'll be like, oh, have you been here before? And if you say no, but they've looked at your D-log and seen that you have written that you have, if you've told a white lie or whatever, then that's when you have problems in terms of background knowledge. Also in terms of background knowledge, they'll want to know that they'll kind of give you scenarios almost, and they'll be like, what would you do if somebody fell here, and have you ever had experience of somebody falling here and stuff like that. So they'll really ask questions during nav legs as well. So the entire thing on assessment is a bit different with training. You don't have to pay as much attention. You still have to pay attention, but you don't have to pay as much attention. generally on assessment, the whole time, you have nav legs, and you'll be in a group of say 4 with one instructor, or that's what mine was anyway. And then we had nav legs, so you'd get a nav, and I'd walk to a point, and then everyone else would have to. Kind of gone into the navigation one, the map. Everyone else would have to follow where you were going. They wouldn't be told the point that you got though. So I'll explain this a bit more in a minute, but essentially you have to be really on your game the whole time. But the assessor will talk to you just like a group would. They'd chat to you and tell you things about what's going on and stuff. And then you're like, oh, and the last point I remember was here. I was last here. I was last here. I was last here. And then it's like, oh, do you remember this? And then you're like, yeah. And then you look down and you're like, damn it, where was I? I've definitely done it. It happens. So yeah, equipment and hazards and steep ground are also covered. And I'll do I've got a whole slide on the last 3 of those. So kit, nav, and hazard. Speaking of kit, so I've kind of split it up into 2 things. So for your day sack, you've got these things, and for your Xbed sack, you've got these things. Obviously, for Xbed, you need a bigger rucksack, but don't go as small as you can reasonably go. On my assessment, the guy had like a proper almost go at me for having a 70-litre rucksack. He was like, oh, it's too big and it's blah blah blah. He was like, why is it so big? And I was like, because my sleeping bag's massive. It's October, it's freezing. And then the guy just looked at me like, well, sorry, I'll bring a free season next time, I'm sorry. But anyway, so try and get a bag that's small enough that it doesn't look like you've brought a hairdryer, was his joke. Yeah, we'll get onto that later. So for the day sack, the first, I've kind of done it I've done this, I've not done it so much with that side, but I've done the day sack side in an order that I'd pack it. So I'd have my bivvy bag or group shelter and first aid kit and repair kit at the bottom of my bag in dry bags, because they're the least likely thing that you're going to need. So yeah, in that circumstance, I hope that I don't need them, if that makes sense. And if I do need them, then something's gone wrong and I probably need all the other things as well as them. So, swings and roundabouts. So bivvy bag, for those people that don't know what a bivvy bag is, it's essentially like a body bag, like a plastic body bag, and you climb in it, or you can cut it open and roll a casualty into it, and it keeps you warm from your own warmth. So it's windproof and waterproof and keeps you moderately warm. It works pretty well. So yeah, that's what I'd take if I was doing a solo day. I wouldn't bother taking a big group shelter for a solo day if it's just me on the hill, because I'm thinking of me, and hopefully if there is a casualty, then the bivvy bag will be enough just to put them in. If I was on a group day, so if I was taking a group out, or if I was with friends, so more than just me, then I'd think of bringing a group shelter. A group shelter is essentially a tent without poles. Think of the parachute games you used to do when you were little in whatever club, youth club, whatever you went to, where you fling the parachute up and then you all sit on the inside. That's what you do with a group shelter. And if you have a casualty, you want to kind of insulate them on the bottom to roll them onto a mat or a bivvy bag or some rucksacks or something that's waterproof and going to keep some heating from the ground. And then you get a group shelter, you get your group into the group shelter surrounding that person, and then hopefully the combined heat of that person who's injured and all the other people in the circle of the group shelter will keep them warm. So these group shelters are windproof and usually waterproof, depends on how shitty and old the group shelter is. Centre ones aren't always waterproof, it depends. So yeah, you throw people in there. You don't necessarily just need to use it for casualties. I've used it a few times for when groups are really cold and when I want them to eat and they're like, I don't want to get anything out of my rucksack because it's so cold. And you're like, okay, just let's all get in here and then we can reassess and get things out of our rucksacks and eat some food or whatever. and it is quite fun for kids to get inside a group shelter. The main bastard thing with that is packing it up again. So they come in like a bag, and you're trying to stuff. Think of like a sleeping bag, stuffing the sleeping bag back in there, except it's all wet and it's all horrible and it's blowing everywhere because you only get it out when it's really windy. So it's worth bearing in mind, if you can move to a more sheltered spot to put it away or to get it out, then that's a good idea. But obviously if you've got a casualty, then so somebody's hurt, then it's not necessarily, you're not going to drag them, are you? That's just nasty. So your first aid kit, the group shelter, sorry, going back to that. You can get different sizes of group shelter. So if you have, say, if I'm going out with some friends on the hill, I'd maybe take a 6 to 8 person group shelter. So if I was going to buy just one group shelter, I'd buy a 6 to 8 person one, for me, because you can probably get most people in that need to be in that, and you're not necessarily going to be in it. You're probably going to be on the phone to mountain rescue or whatever, sorting something out if that's the circumstance. But if I'm with a group, so if I'm with, like, for example, I work in an outdoor centre, so I'm an outdoor instructor most of the time, except now because I'm furloughed, but most of the time, I'm doing other work now, but most of the time, I'm an outdoor instructor. I'm working with up to 12 kids and a teacher and me. Generally covers most bases. You can get like 2 to 3 person ones, and again, the smaller you go, the smaller it'll fit into your bag. But if you have like a group, you don't want to be leaving people out of it, and the more people you can get into it, the warmer it'll be for the people inside it, essentially. So yeah, first aid kit and repair kit. So first aid kit, generally you do the best with what you have. If somebody has broken a femur, you cannot do that much for them, to be honest. You're getting mountain rescue out. But if somebody has scraped their hand or something like that, then it can be really helpful to have plasters and stereo strips and gloves, so that you can obviously keep their blood away from you or you away from their blood, etc. Things like sanitary products as well, I keep in first aid kits, because especially if I'm out with a group, you never know. Some people are just like, "Oh, I'm sorry," but you're like, "Oh, I've got you covered, mate." So yeah, that's something else that's good to keep in there. Also, apparently they're really handy for tampons. People shove them up noses. I don't generally do that. I think that if things are coming out for a reason, aren't they? So I'll just tissue or whatever. But yeah, another story. Antiseptic wipes as well to keep things clean. What else do I have in my first aid kit? I do, not necessarily for day sack, but for the first aid kit for the X-bed, I do have a burns kit as well. So that has like burns gel in it and cling film, so that if you're using a stove, or if the group's using a stove and they get a burn, you don't want to be putting a plaster on a burn. This is going into the first aid now, I'm sorry. You don't want to be putting a plaster on a burn because it sticks to it and it's really horrible to get it off again, because it's like the flesh melts to it essentially. So you get cling film and stuff like that. So yeah, that's worth bearing in mind. Repair kit. So people don't generally talk about this like on ML and stuff, but I have like a little dry bag with repair kit in it. And repair kit for me basically means spare shoelaces and some like sticky glue that sticks your boot back to itself again and things like that. Or like some really sticky, it's called polytunnel tape, and that's really good to like stick soles back on boots and stuff like that. So essentially it's for quick repairs to get people off the hill again. I never used to carry a repair kit until I was on a hill with a group once, and I was a trainee at the time, and somebody snapped a lace, and we were just like, we have a first aid kit, we have a group shelter, but nobody thinks to bring laces, do they? That's not something you bring. So yeah, repair kit, always have laces in it. Also, laces can be really handy for if you end up needing to make something like a tourniquet, which again, they'll go into that on first aid and they'll say, never do it unless somebody's arm's falling off and they need to not lose blood. It's like a last case scenario, but if it needs to happen and mountain rescue's 3 hours away, it needs to happen, doesn't it? Dry bags. So keep all your stuff in dry bags, no matter how nice the weather says it's going to be. It probably isn't. And that can be one big dry bag that lines your rucksack, or it can be individual ones. So generally, I have one big one that lines my rucksack, and then I keep my first aid kit in a dry bag of its own. So then I know that that's all together, if that makes sense. And I keep layers in spare layers in a separate dry bag as well. With regards to food and group shelter, I don't care if they get wet. My food's probably all wrapped up, and my group shelter, if that gets wet, well, it's going to get wet anyway when I fling it out, isn't it? So it's not the end of the world, essentially. Spare layers for your group, that means like hats, gloves, socks even. Oh, going back to first aid kit, blister plasters. My God, lifesaver, man. Stops a lot of complaining, doesn't it? If you're doing like a multi-day thing and I've got a blister and it's like the first day of 5, you're like, damn it. Sticking plasters on them. Sticking plasters on kind of works, but then sometimes it sticks to the blister and that's not good. So if you can get blister plasters, that's good. Anyway, spare layers. So socks can be handy, especially for if people can't get their fingers in gloves. You can then just stick socks on their hands and they can warm up quicker with them. Mittens as well. But I wouldn't spend loads of money on spare layers for your group. I'd use not crap things, but things that you get in a charity shop, like a big fleece you got in a charity shop that you can throw on anybody. So I have an extra large man's fleece that most people would fit in, essentially. An extra large man's zip up windproof that pretty much everyone can fit in. And it doesn't matter if it's massive on people or whatever, it's as long as people can get it on if they're cold. And hats, and always have a spare buff, because I don't know why, but buffs just seem to warm people up. Oh, I forgot to write flask. I'll say it and drink. Sorry, my brain's going. So spare layers for you. Generally, I keep the spare layers for my group and the spare layers for me separate, because the spare layers for me is like my down jacket, and I try my best not to give it away. I obviously will if I have to, but it's more helpful if you can have spare layers for you as separate, because then also you can I don't know, kind of know what you're giving out, if that makes sense. So I know that I'm giving out this cheap jacket that I've got from a charity shop that's good enough to do the job, but that I'm not going to, if I don't get it back, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. It was 20 quid in a charity shop, essentially. So yeah, also a good thing to do before you can get into the hills is go around charity shops and find warm places that you can throw in a bag. Waterproofs, again, always bring your waterproofs, even if it's the sunniest day ever. Just seriously, you'll thank me for it when the thunderstorms come. And especially if you're on assessment and you don't have waterproofs, it paints a very bad image to the course providers or assessors or whatever if you don't have them, because as soon as you get wet, you get cold, and then it escalates, doesn't it? With regards to food, that's all personal preference, to be honest. I'm not going to lecture people on what to bring. I generally go for things in packets that I can eat on the go. But that's just me. I like to be, I've scoffed this flapjack bar or whatever, and now I can move on to, if I can eat the next thing, then I'll eat the next thing or whatever. But often you find that being out on the hill, it's eating little and often. So I have a series of things, and if I have sandwiches, which I do have sometimes, then I'll put maybe 2 half sandwiches in one bag and 2 half sandwiches in another bag, and keep them separate. And then I'll be like, well, I'm eating these ones at this time, these ones at this time, or whatever. You can really plan it out if you want to. I don't generally. I always bring way more food than I need, just because, why not? And on the food front, I always bring a bag of something that's really high energy. So for example, you can get gels and stuff like that. I don't generally carry them, but like a bag of jelly beans or a bag of like chocolate or a bag of something that you can dish out to somebody who needs it, essentially. So, you know, sometimes people just need a kick to get them to a point, or to, you know, yeah. And when I have called out mountain rescue for somebody that wasn't in my group, actually, but like I did have a group out with me on the hill, chucked the group in a group shelter, like with the casualty or whatever, and I had to go off and make the call and get signal because I didn't have any signal, obviously. And then chucked the group in there with their member of staff, threw two bags of jelly beans, I think I had, threw them in, no, jelly babies, that was it, threw them in there. I came back and they were like, hiya, and I was like, you all all right? They were like, yeah, we've named the jelly babies. And I was like, brilliant. So things that keep group morale up, essentially, and stop people getting quiet and sad and low and cold. So the quieter people go, the colder they generally get as well. With regards to drink, again, I'm not going to lecture people on what to bring. I generally go with at least a litre of water if I'm going to be out all day, just because I know that I drink quite a lot. But other people might only go with like a little bit, like 500 milliliters or whatever, and then drink more at the end of the day when they get home. But yeah, I personally go with water bottles, but I've seen hydration pouches and they're a really good idea. It's just that I always forget to wash them and they go moldy, so I never actually bother with them. But that's just me. So yeah, that's an option. With regards to drinks, if it's a particularly cold day, I'd bring a flask of hot something. So I don't drink tea or coffee, just because I don't like it. And hot chocolate in a flask generally goes manky if you forget about it. So I go with hot Ribena or hot juice or something like that, or just warm water. And if people are cold enough, they'll drink anything. Like if I'm really cold, I will drink tea and coffee if that's what people have, essentially. So don't worry too much about what's in it, but think about what's going to be okay to wash out again after you've forgotten about it for 6 months, if you're anything like me. So I'm pretty sure I've got 2 or 3 flasks lying around somewhere that have probably got juice in. So yeah, that's just me, I think. Walking poles are really useful for not just keeping your knees and stuff young. I don't actually generally use walking poles unless I'm, walking downhill and my knees are hurting. But I have them because they're really good for keeping people upright when they're walking. So you tend to find when people are scared and they're walking downhill, they hunch over, makes it harder for them to walk, and then they also are more likely to fall over. So if they can maintain the active posture and keep upright and keep the weight in their feet, then that's a lot better for them. So walking poles are really good for that. And also if somebody goes over on an ankle, walking poles can take off a lot of pressure from their legs then, so then they can go forwards with that, if that makes sense. Mine aren't expensive, they're just quite cheap black diamond ones that fold up and I just stick in the side of my rucksack. I do have them on the outside of my rucksack, just because I don't care if they get wet, and they're quite robust, so they do get a hammering, but then I'm not particularly attached to them. I think they were like 60 quid or something like that. So yeah. Map and compass, again, that's absolutely vital. Like you definitely need them. Mine attached to my compass, and again, they're really handy but not essential. Also, if you want to bring a GPS or an altimeter, you can do, but on ML assessment they will not let you use them. So if you have an altimeter on your watch, they'll make you take your watch off because it's cheating. An altimeter is like tells you what height you're at, so that narrows it down a lot for you when you're trying to work out where you are. Sorry, I've got a puppy, it's very loud. So yeah, they'll make you take that off, and then with a GPS you won't be allowed to use it. But if you have them and you want to experiment with them, then you're more than willing to do that. I think they do sometimes do a GPS like module almost on. They did it on my training. They didn't bother with it on my assessment, so I don't know. I think it depends on your provider, but yeah. Head torch, even if you're not planning to be out after dark, I always bring a head torch because yeah, if you have an incident, then you don't know how long you're going to be out for. Hill rope and helmets. So with regards to like hill rope and helmets, in terms of ML, like they'll generally tell you when you need to bring them, so you won't need to bring them to every day. It'll just be like, for me, it was just on the Tuesday that we needed them. So yeah, it kind of just depends. And then with all of this as well, you can talk to the other people on your training or assessment and discuss who's got what. So if somebody else in your group has got a group shelter, then you don't need to necessarily bring yours. But if you volunteer to bring your first aid kit, then that's kind of sharing the load out, because that's what you do if you had a group of like young people or like a group of adults or whatever with you. You'd be like, oh, can you put this in your bag, and this is a flask for in case we need it and stuff like that. So you'd share things out a little bit. With regards to if somebody else says, I'll bring the first aid kit, say okay and bring a little first aid kit that's yours, which is what I do for me, because like I don't know, I trust people, but I don't trust people, if that makes sense. So I like to know if I need something that I've got it. So yeah. With regards to helmets, generally you won't take a helmet out with you. If you're with a group, you wouldn't take helmets out with you. But you might have a hill rope if you think you might stray into territory where you need it or whatever. So we'll get onto that in a minute, like steep ground stuff. But the helmets, you will wear them on assessment because you are knowingly going into steep ground, if that makes sense. If you don't have a helmet, then you can probably ask to borrow one from the course provider, but I don't know for definite. So yeah, you would have to ask. Xped stuff, so it's all pretty much the same. And again, you can buddy up with people and be like, oh, if you've got this, then I won't bring this or whatever. If you've, yeah, I'd say don't bother bringing a group shelter if you have a tent in your bag on your assessment, because you're just adding weight. And a tent is basically the exact same thing. You can fling it over you. It doesn't matter if you don't have to put it up, just fling it over the top of people or wrap them up in it or whatever. Stove, remember the fuel as well. Somebody on my assessment forgot their fuel, and he genuinely thought he'd the next 2 days. They passed him, but they were like, oh, blah, 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 if you forgot your fuel, blah, blah, blah. They were very arsy about it. So yeah, it's just worth double checking what needs to happen there. And again, being familiar with the setup of your stove and tent and stuff like that. So yeah, I've talked about the rest of that pretty much. Sleeping bag and sleeping mat, again, vital things that you really do need. So this is a picture that I got off the internet. The other ones I got off like from my own pictures or whatever, but this is one I got off the internet because I couldn't bother to walk upstairs and take a picture of my rucksack. They've got this insulated mat on the outside. Generally I wouldn't recommend doing that, or if you do that, put it in a dry bag, because if it gets wet, it'll be a grim night for you, because as soon as that gets wet, your sleeping bag soaks it up and then it'll come into you, and then it'll be just, yeah, it's not very nice. So yeah, don't do that or put it in a dry bag. So yeah, and then with regards to sleeping bag and sleeping mat, what sort of thing you want depends on what time of year you're doing your assessment. So it's obviously summer conditions, but I did my assessment in October, so it kind of depends on when is right for you and how cold it's going to be. And you know how cold you get. If you get really cold, then you might be thinking about bringing a 4-season sleeping bag and things like that. Hill rope and helmets, generally they'll try and get you to do all the steep ground stuff on a different day to the days that Xped's taking place. And if you do end up bringing a hill rope and stuff with you, it'll be because they want to see it again. So somebody else or you in your group needs to show them something else again. But generally they'll try and avoid making you bring that because it's extra weight and you'll already be having quite a heavy rucksack compared to the previous few days. And yeah, with regards to Xped sacks as well, something that I kind of think is really helpful is to kind of pack all that stuff and bring everything that you would bring on an assessment, and like take all that stuff with you on a wild camp, see how heavy it all is, and possibly work up and build your fitness with it. So sometimes that can be walking up and down stairs with it a few times a day or whatever, just to kind of really get used to how heavy it is compared to a normal day sack, because it does make quite a lot of difference. Like a tent and stove and stuff can be quite heavy, even if you get like the lightest ones possible, which are like billions of pounds or however much they are nowadays. Like they do make quite a lot of difference to the weight. So yeah, it's just worth bearing in mind, and the bulk as well. So especially, yeah, get a rucksack that fits you well. So you can get ones that, I'd always recommend getting ones that have a waist strap and a chest strap. And if you can get it across your chest, that's a good thing as well. Sometimes I can't get it across my chest. It kind of depends on what make I've got. But yeah. So moving on, navigation. So these are some of the points that I got asked to go for on my assessment. On your training, you'll have they'll basically tell you, oh, find this point, and then you'll go to it and try your best. And if you can't find it, they won't be mad with you or whatever. And initially they'll probably tell you how they want you to do it and stuff like that. Whereas on assessment, they'll be like, find this point. Actually, you'll be in like a little group. The assessor will take you away from the group. They'll say, find this point, and then you'll walk to that point. Nobody else in the group will know where you're going. They'll just be following you. And then when you get to that point, you'll say, I think I'm here. And the assessor will say, okay, and won't tell you if you're right or wrong, which shits you up sometimes, but is the way it is. Like it's a proper mental game sometimes in ML to know whether you're right or wrong or not. And that's just practice and just going out and like really being sure of yourself or whatever. But yeah, the rest of the group won't know where you are. They'll get there and he'll say, okay, everyone relocate. And then they'll have to say, I think I'm here. And he'll say okay to them as well, and won't tell them if they're right or wrong either. So it is a bit of a mind mess, if that makes sense, if you let it get to you. So yeah, I'm just gonna get rid of this. So yeah, these are a couple of the examples that I got on my assessment. So this was on the first day. This was a real like horrible one to find. So we were here on the blank bit here just below the 500-meter line. I knew where we were there, and he told me to go to the A of arrow. Oh my god, there was nothing there. Like I was literally just using pacing and timing and stuff to try and get there. It's yeah, amazingly enough, didn't find it. I'm an idiot, yeah, but it's fine. We dealt with it. I found all the other points that day, and it's about like not getting in your own head. I went back 2 weeks later and found it after the assessment. So yeah, and I did pass the assessment, so it's fine. We're not bitter about it at all. Another one that I've had on my that was on the nav day, and then these 1, 2, 3, 4 were all on the X bed. So yeah, I had to find from the hanging stone. We were at the hanging stone there. I had to find this ring contour. So the second one in. By the way, these are both on the same level. This whole thing is the same level. Like you cannot tell the difference. So that was fun. Also, this path doesn't exist. Brilliant. So we walked along here and then worked out this path wasn't here. Found this re-entrant. You can see there's like a faint re-entrant line. That was like a faint sort of dip in the ground where a stream could possibly be, and came up here, and then yeah, worked it out off where this crag was, how to get back to there. Another one I had was this ring contour. That was actually all right to find. That was above, like higher up than the rest of the ground or whatever. So yeah, that was okay to find. I had this. I had other ones as well, but this is just the ones that really I remember. I had this tarn. All of this was one boggy tarn. So nav to round this corner, came to this bit of contour that sticks out here, and then paste back to this corner and was like I'm here. So yeah, that's another one of the examples. And then I had this contour here, just off the path, which you'd think is super easy to find, but yeah, doesn't actually exist. All of it was the same level as far as my eyes could tell. It obviously wasn't, it was slightly raised, but it seemed like the same level. So yeah, it was not difficult, but like not super easy. And these two were both on night nav as well, so they were in the dark. And yeah, and then the guy after me had this tarn, so he did a bearing, got to this tarn, and said he was there. And like, you know, when you're like, I'm pretty sure this isn't where we're supposed to be, like I'm pretty sure. But anyway, yeah, he was like adamant that he was there, and then turns out he wasn't. So, which is fine. It's okay if you get things wrong, as long as you, on the next leg, you get to like another point or whatever, and you're like, oh, I was wrong on that one. Now we're here, but before we were here or whatever. So it doesn't make too much difference, but it's just, well, it does a little bit. If you do it too many times, then they will defer you on it or whatever. But yeah, so it's also worth kind of, when you get to a point, really looking around that point. So, you know, I got to this, like the ring contour up here, and I had a proper good look round everywhere, all over here. I took about like 5 minutes to have a real good look round or whatever, to make sure that I was definitely there, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's worth having a good look round. And if he'd had a really good look round, he'd have worked out that there wasn't two streams coming in like there should have been up here, and there wasn't a crag over to the, you know, this side over here, sort of thing. So yeah, it's just, yeah, we all make mistakes, don't we? Like, I could have definitely done the arrow, the A of arrow better. I just took a bearing and hoped for the best, and it did not work out. So yeah, oh well, we're not bitter. We're not bitter. We've moved on. Hazards and emergency stuff. So this is when steep ground and rope work and things come into play. And also there's like other hazards, obviously, with regards to like crossing rivers and things like that. So avoidance is like the best strategy that you can possibly do, to be honest, like planning your day so that you don't go into contact with, you know, difficult places or whatever. And if you do need to cross a river or a stream, then you need to use like footbridges or cross in the most safe place possible. So, you know, choosing the right place to go. With regards to route planning, hello. Why are you bringing me a puppy? With regards to route planning, this is a puppy. It's called Sunny. Okay. Anyway, with regards to route planning, you want to think about where you're going and what could possibly go wrong and things like that, and how you would end up stumbling into steep ground. If you do end up in steep ground, so you could end up in like a little craggy step like here, you need to think about whether spotting, which is when you like stand there like that, really, like help somebody or catch them or whatever, whether that's adequate, or whether to do rope work and like get above them and bring them up to you. And that'll depend on a lot of things. It'll depend on, you know, what sort of terrain you're in, how stable it is, and how big the person is in relation to you. So if you're spotting somebody who's 100 kilograms more than you and they fall back, you're not really going to be able to do anything for them. You're probably just going to cushion their fall, but kill yourself in the process. So yeah, that's kind of the thought process there. And obviously this will be explained a lot better on trainings and stuff like that, but I'm just kind of flinging it out now for people to bear in mind and stuff like that. You can also do refreshers on all of this stuff as well, which is handy. Like, you don't have to just do a refresher on the whole thing. You can do a refresher on steep ground or a refresher on now. You can like zone it out or whatever.
Holly, sorry, just flag. We are a bit after 8, so I don't know how much content you've got left. So just wanted to kind of flag that to you, just to make sure we've got enough time for questions and stuff.
Yeah, sorry, I am about, yeah, my next slide is questions. So I'll fling through this and then move on to that. So yeah, you can bring people up. You also have to cover doing abseils and using anchors. So with regards to all of this though, you will only need one knot, and that's an overhand knot or an overhand knot on a bite, and that's the only knot you need. You can do all the fancy stuff if you want to, or you can just do that one knot. Effective movement in steep ground. So on my X-bed, we had to come down here, which is a very steep scree slope on the side of Great Gable. That does not do it justice. It was horrific. And yeah, with X-bed rucksacks on. So it's worth kind of getting yourself into steep ground and trying to find your feet on it almost. There is courses on movement in steep ground. So yeah, that's also a thing you can do if you think you need to. Emergency stuff, if you need mountain rescue, it's 999 police and then mountain rescue. To locate you, they can use the app What Free Words, which you might have heard of. It's an app on your phone, and it gives them free words, and then puts you in a 3 meter by 3 meter square that you could be in. So it narrows it down quite a lot for them. You can also give them a 6-figure grid reference, which, provided it's right, can again give them like a very direct place of where you are. Group shelter use and first aid, I've kind of talked about that. And generally, with an emergency, you're just trying to make things not worse than they already are. So keeping people safe, stopping people wandering off and stuff like that, because that just adds more casualties and adds more problems than you already have. So one of the questions I got was, where do you get work after you're qualified? So there's a Facebook group called Freelance Outdoor Instructors, and you can get work on there. You can also get DV work, so that works pretty well. And generally, once you start meeting people and getting a name for yourself, then that's a good way to kind of get out there, if that makes sense. So another thing I got asked was, what should people be working on when QMDs are like not out, so when you can't go on hills, essentially. So you can do nav in your area, like just navigate to Starbucks or whatever and use maps and try and work out how to get places and stuff like that. You can look into common plants and facts about the areas where you might end up doing your assessment. So look into, various areas and stuff like that. And I already mentioned looking into the weather and how that all works. So yeah, if people have questions, then I will start to answer them. They're in the chat. I'm doing it. Everything's fine. So what sort of costs are associated with training and assessment for the free qualifications? Okay, so Lowland Leader and Hill and Moorland Leader are obviously, Lowland Leader is the least expensive and Mountain Leader is the most expensive, just because of the amount of days that you're doing it. So I'm not entirely certain of the costs, to be honest. You can look it up on the mountain training website. Various course providers will do different amounts. So yeah, it kind of depends. That's not very helpful, I know. But essentially, yeah, mountain leader training can be about, it depends whether you go residential or not as well, whether you stay while you're doing it. But yeah, it can be like, I've seen courses that I've advertised at like £500. So that's probably the most expensive training that I've seen. But I've also seen them advertised at £200. So it kind of depends on who you go with, where you are, and what your preferences are. Assessment, that can be, to be honest, assessments generally are more money than trainings because you need them. Whereas trainings, you can go straight into assessment. You don't necessarily need your training. It's just most people choose to do it. So assessments are generally a bit more expensive. So they can be up to £600. But if you work in a centre, so I work in a centre, you can get qualifications paid for by where you work, essentially. So moving on, with the QMDs, do you need to have been solo or walk leader for all of them? That's a really good question. You can do, yeah, it can be either. So you can do solo days, you can do days with friends, you can be a walk leader, but they want to see a range of things. They want to see that you can go out in the hills and be out on your own and not worry or whatever. But they also want to see that you can lead groups in the hills and stuff like that. If you go out in the hills and you're out with your friends and you're primary person doing map reading and stuff like that, then say that you're the leader, because essentially if those people wouldn't know where they were going without you, or wouldn't know what they would necessarily do without you, or wouldn't have the confidence without you, then you are taking that in charge and you are kind of the leader, if that makes sense. And can you log backdated QMDs from years ago? Yes, you can. You can log QMDs from years ago, and that's fine. I'd probably say that you want quite a few though from recent, if that makes sense. As many as you can from recent, but if whatever. If you've got them from years ago and you want to add them to the additional ones or whatever, then that's a really good idea, because it shows that you've got a breadth of knowledge. Do you have any recommendations for resources for learning flora and fauna? I'd say there's apps on your phones that you can get for free and stuff like that, which are really cool. Like you can take pictures of things and then it's like brilliant, this tells me what this is or whatever. There's millions of books out there that tell you what various things are, and just kind of there's books, things. This is a really good book. I've mentioned it last time, but it covers pretty much everything that you need to know in terms of mountain leader. There's also ones for lowland leader and hill and moorland leader. So these books, Mountain Training Handbook, are really good. There's also ones on like climbing and winter climbing and stuff like that. So they're really good for getting to know what you need to know for assessment. People saying thank you now. Lovely. I think that's all the questions. If anyone has anything else. Somebody said Nature of Snowdonia is great book for mountain specific flora and fauna. There's also a beacon version, so there you go. Nature of Snowdonia. So I don't have anything else unless anyone else has anything else. Hope that was good-ish, moderately informative.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks so much, Holly.
Cool. I've been doing ML training for years. I've been thinking about doing ML training for years. Main issue is, despite lots of time in the outdoors doing various activities, etc., I'm hopeless at nav unless I'm using that. So first up for me is to get some nav training. Yeah, well, you can do nav training as separate to an ML training. Like you can do nav training prior to doing ML training if that's something that you think you would benefit from. So it's entirely up to you as to how you do that. So unless anyone has anything else, then we shall finish. Somebody recommends now NNAS awards to build up nav experience. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Cool. So thank you very much for everyone that came, and I hope you enjoyed it-ish.